Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to explore different life cycles, and we're going to look at them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances, believe it or not, are not usually about the money. They are usually more about your emotions associated with your finances. Although we may be fairly general in our discussions, we'd love to hear from you, make it more personal and more relevant. So you can call in, you can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial, or you can post your comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube, wherever you're listening. We're going to be exploring the financial fumblings of divorce today, and there are quite a few that you can get through. I'm looking forward to our conversation, not just because I'm a finance guy who works in divorce, but because this topic is so incredibly important for you. Mark Schondorf is a divorce attorney from the North Shore of Chicago. He's with the firm Hecht Schondorf and is my guest today. Mark, I'm thrilled to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Hirsch, for having me. Really super excited to be here and be part of the show.
So I will ask you a little bit more, but I just want to kind of start off by saying Mark is the chapter president for the National Association of Divorce Professionals. I have referred a couple people his way, and not just is he very competent, he's a really good guy. You'll become a fan of his just like me by the end of the show, I'm sure of that. So before we kind of jump into the hard questions, I'm just going to ask you to share a little bit about your background. Where does your practice focus? Okay. Things like that.
So I tell people I'm the divorce attorney that means business. And of course, that's a little bit of a double entendre. So I have a background. I studied finance as an undergrad. I really enjoyed it. I thought I was going to go that route. But then I ended up going home and selling real estate for a little while. And then I went to law school. And I really wanted to sort of, I'm an entrepreneurial kind of person. And so the business that I ended up starting was a law practice. I practiced litigation, business and real estate litigation, employment law, things like that. And then I moved to Chicago from California with my wife, and we started a family, and I started networking around. And the practice that made the most sense at the time was going into family law and divorce, because at that point I was a family man and I finally understood what it means to be a father and a husband. And then I noticed there's a hole in the market that a lot of divorce lawyers don't really understand finance. And they don't really understand tax returns and business valuations and things like that. And so I decided to sort of focus on that because I have that education, and it's been going well. So I do, and I also mean business. I'm more than happy to get into the mud with somebody on a case if I want to. It's not my preference, as we can talk about. But that's the focus of my practice. I'm in Northbrook, Illinois. It's on the North Shore of Chicago, and I have a couple of partners. We try to focus on business and real estate issues for small business owners, and so I represent a lot of business owners in the divorce context, and that's me.
And those are complex issues, so people should definitely be reaching out.
Yeah, the finances in a divorce can get complicated.
Yes, and I'm sure as we have our discussion today, people will realize some of these things and, some of the misconceptions, I think, sometimes around finances and divorce as well. So, and finances are probably the most spoken about topic in a divorce, and when you're doing your negotiations, I think it's huge. So what is the first thing that you advise clients to do when it comes to the financial side?
So that's a very broad question, Hirsch. And I think it really depends on where you are in the process. I would say that the best thing you can do is to educate yourself on your financial situation. And that could be very difficult. I get a lot of people who say the other spouse controls all the finances. They don't really know where all the money is. They all wrote all the checks. It really is in your best interest to try to make that happen, to try to understand, how much debt do you guys have? How much income do you guys have? And look at your tax returns. Sort of, if you're planning on a divorce, certainly you want to sort of do your due diligence and get those documents as best as you can. It's not always possible because one party can control everything. But the second thing I would say is to make sure you have a team in place. If you're going to end up getting divorced, you're going to want your own accountant, your own financial advisor. talk to a lawyer earlier on in the process. That's probably, in terms of prep, that's what I would advise.
Yeah, I think the education piece is huge, especially because there's so many misconceptions out there. And to remember that you could be living right next door to somebody who's got the same type of house, same type of car, similar amount of kids, and your divorce is a completely different divorce. So it's interesting to learn the things, but make sure that you apply them specifically to yourself. And I'll tell you, I've actually created a program called Who Am I Financially? Because of so many people who don't know that. As you said, we divide and conquer responsibilities. Usually one person deals with the finances. And I think that becomes an enormous piece. I've even had somebody say to me once, Hirsch, we're so close. He said to me, give me a number for maintenance, and I don't know what to tell him. You really do need to educate yourself, and you really do need to understand your financial situation. So important.
And I think we bring up an interesting point. As a divorce lawyer, I get to really see how everybody lives their life financially, and it's very different. And you can have two people living right next door to each other, and they do not have the same situation. You don't really know where the money's coming from. What you see is not what you get.
No, I agree. I've seen that plenty. I agree. And, and many people obviously are nervous about their financial future. The divorce is a big step. It's a big change, and they want to protect themselves. So should someone, try to protect themselves by, let's say, taking half of the money out of a joint account and putting it in their own name?
That's all right. So that's a really, really good question. And I get that a lot. And so what are we trying to accomplish when we do that, right? You take the money, you're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to protect what you have, and you're trying to protect what the other spouse might or might not do. So if you're looking to get divorced, about to get divorced, if there's money that is in a joint account and you really have a serious concern that your spouse is going to abscond with the money, they're going to hide it, they're going to spend it on something, they're going to gamble it away. If this is a situation where a lot of money is coming in for, in one chunk for whatever reason, and now, you want to make sure you preserve it because you're afraid that what the other spouse is going to do, it's not a bad idea. How much trouble can you possibly get into? Not a whole lot, because you're basically leaving the spouse with the other half. And if, you get in front of a judge, they're going to say, okay, well, you get this half and you get that half. You may have to account for it. So you can't just go and spend it on nonsense and sort of think you can hide it. It's not your money; it's marital money, most likely, depending on the state. And so you still have to account for it. It still may get divided later. It really is just to make sure that if a spouse is going to really try to turn off the spigot financially, that you have something there that can preserve you until you can get the right processes in place and make sure that figure the finances out.
Right. And I think just touching on that a little bit, one of the misconceptions is it's in my name, it must be my money. That's not the way it works.
Not at all.
Marital assets can be in a single name. So just something for people to think about and remember as well.
That's a hard concept for people to understand, the idea of a marital estate that is its own sort of amorphous, legal entity that, owns things. So,
right. Yeah. So, and along a similar line, we have direct deposits or checks, money coming in, usually put into a joint account because we go to share the expenses usually. Is that something they should stop depositing their paycheck into that joint account, put it into a different account? What would you share on that?
That's again, a somewhat of a dicey scenario. So here's where I am on that. First of all, like you said, the money that you earn during a marriage, I'm almost every state, that is marital money. And so wherever you put it, it's marital. So if you start taking your marital paycheck and you start putting it into an account that is not really truly non-marital, it's money you had before the marriage, you do run the risk of mixing all that money up and it becoming marital. The reason you would stop putting money into a joint account is you're trying to stop contributing to the other spouse. So the danger with that is if you are in a situation where you're cutting the other spouse off financially, then that could draw attorneys running into court with emergency motions. Courts really don't want to see somebody trying to turn off the lights. Whatever's happening in a divorce in a marriage is going to continue to happen. The mortgage still needs to get paid. The lights still need to be turned on. And at that point, you might get a petition for spousal support. Now, if you're both earning income and you decide, I don't want to share this money with you, and you both kind of separate that out, I mean, that's not that situation could end up, you could be doing okay in that it's still marital money, but a court might look at that and say, well, you put your money here, you put your money there, it's around the same amount of money, you'll be okay. So it's really, I would say, ask your lawyer. It's a case-by-case situation. It's not a universally great idea. It's not a universally terrible idea. There are going to be consequences.
So consequences is huge. I think people do need to realize every action may have a consequence that may create stress, angst, and maybe even cost.
Right.
As you said earlier, if you start doing things like this and the other spouse starts running to court with motions, that's going to raise your fees. That is money going out the door you don't want going out the door. Or you're doing things and it could be perceived as kind of a shady action, and now you've got to explain yourself in front of a judge or whatever it might be. So people should always keep that in mind. What are the consequences? What is the next step, or maybe even the retaliation, so to speak, from the other party based on what I might do? So I think those are all things. And as you said, those consequences, it may be financial, it may be stress, it may be a combination of the two. So
right. And going back to your point earlier, there's an emotional place where all this begins, right? So you have a spouse that is trying to control a situation, trying to escape a situation. They're using money as a tool, in the whole process. And then every case is different. So, some cases some families need certain sources of income more than others. It's a little bit of a house of cards. Sometimes there's not as much support, in other places financially. So you're depending on this money versus other situations where it's not as important to keep things going. There aren't as many resources. So every case is its own, sort of jigsaw puzzle.
Right. And, to your point on emotions, they are very high. And very often can be the most expensive part of your divorce,
right? Because
of the actions that you take, because you are emotionally in this fog sometimes. That can be the most expensive part. So just be very, very careful with all of that as well. So we are in January. It's about to be tax season. I think we need to touch on taxes a little bit. And one of the things I talk a lot about with clients, I always want to look at, things like pay stubs or how are taxes being held. This is kind of a warning piece before I get to my question, I guess. There's a lot of ways that you can hide money through your taxes. And this is something that you certainly should be looking at least having an understanding of the flow so that maybe if they're going to file, are they going to get a huge refund as an example because they've been squirreling money away through taxes. So whether it's through an employer, whether it's through quarterlies, just be very careful, have a real understanding of what's going on with the taxes.
Right.
But one of the more frequent questions, I guess, really is around how do we file? So 1231 of last year of 2020 determines what can you do when you come to filing. So if you were still married, you're in the middle of the process, you really have two choices. You can do married filing joint, or you can do married filing separate. So can you share some insights on this?
Sure.
What is best? How should you handle that?
So, that's interesting. So I'm going to say that generally in most situations, it's better to file jointly because first of all, you have what they call the marriage tax, right? So when you file separately, you actually pay a little more in taxes. So it's not as advantageous on a whole dollar-to-dollar level. Sometimes we get this. Sometimes in the middle of a divorce case, somebody files their taxes by themselves, and that involves either a larger refund going directly to that filing spouse, right? So they're angry, they want to cut out the other spouse, and they're going to say, I'm going to file separately, I'm going to get the refund, and it's mine, which is not true. That's a marital asset if it's coming from your marital income. And so then we have to, refile it, or you got to do the math and pay the spouse back, or, and come out of pocket so that the other spouse is whole, because if you were going to file jointly, there's a certain amount of money that wouldn't have been available. Again, ask your accountant as to, you want to make sure everyone's on board with what's going on, but generally filing jointly is better. The reasons that people don't file jointly during divorce, if there is a low trust, if one spouse really thinks the other person is horsing around with their taxes and they don't want to be liable, they'll file their own tax return. If you have a lot of non-marital income that you're trying to protect, and you say, look, I know that I made X dollars at this job, but I also, I've got this investment that I inherited and it's mine and I'm making a lot of money on it. And that's, why should I have to, get a refund and then throw that into the marital pot? That's mine. So that's kind of, how that goes as well. There are a lot of, as you said, this gets a little bit off the question, but people can play a lot of games with taxes, and especially if they own their own businesses, do a lot of investments, have corporations and LLCs and things like that. It becomes it becomes a labyrinth, and people do things like you said. A lot of forensic accountants have told me that people will overpay their estimated taxes. They're basically going to take money and give it to the government. The government's holding it. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody realizes how much money's gone out the door. And then once the divorce is over, they refile their tax returns, get, $100,000 in refunds that, back that they overpaid taxes. So people play games.
Yeah, I was actually literally dealing with that yesterday. Somebody we asked for the W-4, which is that form you fill out to explain how the payroll system should withhold. And this person had put another $250 a paycheck, 26 paychecks in the year. You can see that's going to add up pretty quickly as to what they were squirreling away, hoping that maybe they would, they were estimating August, September time, but that would be 8 or 9 months worth of extra money they were putting away. So in the MSA, the dissolution agreement, we're looking at putting in there that they need to, do a true up at that point, so to speak. There's a lot of ways and people need to be careful, but it comes back to what you were saying with education. It's not just educating yourself on the rights and what should be happening through the process, but where are the things that I need to be aware? And I think if you've never been involved in the tax planning with your spouse or the filing, because that happens often. I've seen the spouse brings it over, says sign on line, at the bottom here, and points to a line, and you don't even look at it. And all of a sudden, when you're getting divorced, you see kind of what's going on, and you need to take that responsibility. And that might be one of the things that you need to think about as well. But I agree. I've also run into married filing joint 90% of the time, if not more, is going to be really the advantageous way to go. Even though you don't like that person, you got to think about what is best for me as a whole and, for the family as a whole.
And sometimes what we do actually is if we're sort of getting to the end of the year in a divorce and it's really advantageous, what we'll do is we'll sign a settlement agreement and we'll prove the case up, and we'll have it, ask the judge to actually sign and enter the divorce after the first of the year. And that way they can continue to file jointly and share that return. So, there are, games we can play for the better, I guess.
Yeah, well, we should offset the bad games with good games, I guess, right? So, and talking income, talking taxes, each spouse, obviously the income that they earn is a major factor, because maintenance is a big piece of a divorce, child support is a big piece of divorce, and how is that determined? Through people's income and lifestyle, obviously, of how they live with their income. Should someone start working, stop working? What should they do before filing, or even if they're in the middle of the divorce process? What should they do around their employment? Give some insights around that, if you would.
So that's a really interesting question. And so let me sort of explain how things go. So we have this concept, a lot of states are moving toward looking at, both spouses' income. Illinois now looks at both spouses' income for maintenance and for child support. And so first of all, the court doesn't want you to horse around with your income. So if they get a sense that you're underemploying yourself voluntarily, it's going to be called, an imputation. You're going to be imputed with income. And that means that we're going to assume you can earn a certain amount of money. I had a client once who, he couldn't get a job, and he's uneducated and he's not really employed, but he also built the home theater system, for the family. And the judge looked and said, you're a pretty smart guy. I think you can go and earn 30 grand, $15 an hour. You can go and do that. And so when we start running the numbers, we're going to assume you make 30 grand. I had another client who has a business, isn't making much money. That's what she wants to do. But we're going to say, well, you can go out and get a minimum wage job. Now, this can sort of come around on the other end. I would tell you, you don't want to overemploy yourself. So it's, for example, I had a situation once where a client was, either an Uber driver or a piano teacher. They were doing some sort of side income to earn more money. And then, the argument goes, well, I have to quit this job because now I got to take care of the kids more. And the judge says, well, you were doing this before, so now you can't just go away and assume, now you just don't want to earn the money because you don't want to pay. So I think twice. If you think things are on the rocks, I think twice about, the instinct is, unfortunately, this is the road to ruin is paved with good intentions. You want to go, hey, one of the biggest stresses in which leads to divorce is finances. Hey, how do we fix that? Well, I'll get another job. Well, hey, it didn't fix that, but now I have this other job, and if I quit it, I'm going to get tagged for quitting that job. So it's a catch-22. It's a trick bag, and that's difficult. Certainly, just deciding to not work, in the midst of a divorce is a bad idea. If it's a good faith, if you got laid off, you got laid off. But you are creating a track record of your earning potential and your earning history, and that's going to be part of your history. And so once you get divorced, everyone's going to know that. There's no real right answer. I don't want to tell someone just don't get a job and don't get a career. If you need it, you need it. But at the end of the day, everyone's going to assume that that's what you can do.
I would add to that. I think everything is spot on. The one thing, just a caution more than adding, is sometimes what's also going to happen is somebody used to work. They're now a stay-at-home mom or dad, but they do have an earnings potential. They used to have a career before the family. So sometimes people think, I've been a stay-at-home mom or dad for 10 years, 15 years, and they think, they're going to have an income of zero at that point when they're doing the calculation, but they can very often argue that imputed income, you were saying, you have the potential to earn at least, let's say, $30,000. Right. We're going to move in and we're going to do it from at 30,000. So just some things to consider.
You can always go to the grocery store and bag groceries, unfortunately. And that comes up a lot because on the one hand, if somebody has a degree, I've seen people with advanced degrees, but they haven't been in the market and they haven't been using those skills for 20 years. So you can't simply assume that they're going to go out and, okay, well, now you're just going to get a job as a high-flying lawyer because you have a law degree. If you haven't used it in 20 years, right. There's a certain amount of time we expect to get back on your feet, but there is sort of a ceiling that you're not going to get beyond.
Right. And we are actually running a little late. I lost track of time a little bit because it's kind of an energetic conversation. Great. Mark, before we go to a break, can you just share a quick, easy way for people to get in touch with you?
Sure. The easiest way is probably to give me a call. The number is 312-878-1202. Again, 312-878-1202. You can visit my website. It's hechtschondorf.com, HECHTSCHONDORF.com. That's a lot. I'll say it again. HECHTSCHONDORF. HechtSchondorf.com. I wish I had a catchier website. Maybe I'll get one if I keep doing these things, but that's the best way.
Great. I appreciate it. We will be right back in about 90 seconds. We're going to take some bills to pay and go from there. Thanks. Hello and welcome back. I have Mark Schondorf from Hecht Schondorf, a Chicago North Shore law firm, as my guest today. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. As we've been talking, I have been making notes because I do like to recap a little bit of what we've spoken about. And right now, I'm sure I didn't get everything. We've spoken about a lot of things, starting with educating yourself and making sure that you understand where you are and what's going to happen. Marital assets, moving money around, employment, taxes, protecting yourself. And as I said, I am sure there's a few that I have missed, but we have already in just 20, 25 minutes covered an enormous amount, and looking forward to the second half of our discussion. Mark, thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me, Hirsch.
And just jumping right back in, I guess, another major topic, and I spend a lot of time showing people all the options, is housing. A lot of people want the house, they don't want the house. Sometimes they cannot afford it, they want it. Sometimes they can afford it, it's not the best move. They want to buy a new house, start fresh. There's a lot of options to think about with all of this. Can you talk a little bit about, and again, I think, Mark, you and I could actually probably spend an entire show just on the house.
Probably.
Let's just take one piece of it, right?
So I lecture to the Chicago Association of Realtors, for their continuing education on divorce and housing. So I can literally talk for 3 hours about it. But you're not getting credit, so let's just jump into it. Buying a new house during a divorce is kind of dicey. Some people have the means to do it, and they can. Is it a bad idea? No. Is it a good idea? No. It's a little bit of in between. Most states, divorce really differs from state to state more, I think, than any other area of law. Most states will, it depends on, where you're buying the house, what funds you're using to buy the house. If you're going to pay the mortgage and you're paying it from your income, that's, you're essentially buying a new marital asset. Now, a court might say, okay, well, as a practical matter, that we know that that's going to end up yours, and it's sort of, you get a credit for it, really. But sometimes you have a situation. I had a situation where a spouse basically sopped up all of the marital cash as a down payment for a new house, which caused a lot of problems. Because now there wasn't enough money to pay certain bills and pay certain debts and divide things up. And it was like, okay, but now you got another house hanging out there, and it really derailed a lot of negotiating. So reasons it's a good idea. Obviously, it's always a good idea from a financial perspective. Not always, but it can be. Purchasing property, purchasing real estate. There are financial benefits. But on the whole, I'd probably say it's better to not, just because, again, you have issues of your what happens to that down payment? Where's that money coming from? Is it marital money? Is it not marital money? Some states say any property you buy during the marriage is presumed marital, and now you have to prove that you got the money that was non-marital, and that causes attorney's fees and fighting. What happens if the house appreciates? What happens if it depreciates? It generally can cause problems. Unless people are very liquid and it's really not an issue. That is usually, becomes a concern. So that's usually what I see.
So, just at one topic of buying a house, I think people can see the complexity around it in a case by case. So definitely don't make any assumptions, especially your house is usually one of your two biggest assets, and you certainly don't want to make mistakes with that.
I'm going to say this. An interesting portion about people don't think about is buying a house usually involves a mortgage. And a mortgage involves a mortgage application, which is a sworn statement and a crime to lie on. So if a spouse is buying a house in the middle of a divorce and they say, in the case, I only make X dollars, and we can go and subpoena that mortgage application, and it turns out you said you made double, you're going to have some explaining to do. So, careful. Careful.
Back to the actions have consequences, right?
Exactly.
So, no surprise to anyone with COVID, global pandemic, people have been hit financially more than ever. I think we're seeing where people are needing to, whether it's withdraw, borrow funds from 401ks and things like that. Is that a good idea in general? Not even because of COVID, in general, is that a good idea during a divorce?
So I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't tell you if it's a good or bad idea to borrow from a 401k. It definitely happens. 401ks are interesting because they have a marital. If the person was earning and contributing to that 401k when they got married, then there's going to be a non-marital component. There's going to be a marital component. Dividing them is a little wonky. Borrowing the funds is not necessarily a bad idea. It depends on what you're using the funds for, because generally debts that are incurred during the marriage are marital debts. And if they're used for non-marital purposes, great. I think that at the bottom line is, if you're going to borrow them, for example, to pay for your attorney's fees, which does happen, understand if it's something that really isn't going to benefit the marriage, you're not fixing up the house, you're not paying off, marital credit cards, or things like that, then you have to be ready to understand or to face the consequence that the portion of that 401k that you eventually get may be encumbered by that debt, maybe not. Right, it depends. If it's really you're using it to pay off, like, hey, the furnace broke and we need to borrow money to pay for it, and it's a marital expense, then you're both going to chip in for that. But if you got to hire a lawyer, the other party's got to hire their lawyer, and this is really a debt that is gonna follow you, and you're just borrowing against your own share. So, and
I would say, even outside of a divorce, anytime you're looking at something like retirement funds, 401k, IRA, anything, really need to understand what those consequences are in general. I mean, a loan is a loan, but if you leave the employer as an example, it could all be due all at once back to that, depending on the plan type. And if you can't give it, it could all become income and penalized. So just a lot of things to consider all in. So
yes.
Talking about loans, debt, everything, when working with debt, there's a lot of considerations to take into account. And possibly the most common form of debt a family has is credit card debt. Not everyone has a home, but almost everybody has at least one credit card, sometimes way too many credit cards. Should someone get a new credit card when they're in the middle of a divorce?
It's not a bad idea. So here's where I'll go with that. This goes back to, should I take half the money out of the account? If you're in a situation where you're really concerned about debt, you're really concerned about the other party, the other spouse running up debt. It's not uncommon, for example, the spouse, one spouse leaves and all of a sudden they're going to start going on a spending spree. Maybe they're trying to increase their lifestyle for some strategic purpose, or they're just spending things on things because they think, hey, my husband or wife is going to pay for half of this anyway. If there's that concern, then splitting debt up is not a bad idea. I think if you're going to, I have a case right now where the parties literally they moved out of, one party moved out of the house, and at that point they froze the credit cards and got new credit cards because they want to encapsulate in time that from this point forward we're not really working together, we're not living together, it's not a marital expense. And so I'm concerned I can live on less means than my other, the other spouse. And it really, what it does, it makes it very clear what the other person is spending. So sometimes you have credit cards, 2 credit cards, 1 account. Did I buy this? Did you buy this? Who's spending money here and there? Now I got my credit card. This is what I'm spending. You got yours. That's what you're spending. And a lot of times if that happens, if one person is incurring more, daily living debt, and there's other factors in a divorce, they may end up, great, that's going to be assigned to you. We know that that's what you incurred for you to live your life. And, so it's not a bad idea. Again, talk to your attorney. But I don't think it's a bad idea. I think that what is a bad idea is getting a new credit card and continuing to use the old one and the new one. I think you want to really make a clean break. That's what you're going for there.
I'd also say I've written a lot of blogs about credit cards and debt over the years, and credit cards can get you in financial trouble. So obviously be very, very careful with them. Interest rates at 20% and even more sometimes.
29, 30%. It's crazy.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would throw in here is sometimes one spouse, a lot of the debt or the credit cards, the mortgage are in that one spouse's name sometimes, and the other spouse may not actually have much of a credit history. It is a way that can help you, but again, be very cautious. I mean, 35% roughly of your credit score is the consistency and longevity of paying back your credit card or revolving debt. So there are advantages, but again, be very careful because you can get in a lot of trouble if you're not careful with credit card. You have to
be careful. And there are other factors to consider as well. Something that I've seen once or twice is if there's a lot of credit card debt, but there's also a lot of 401k or a lot of qualified assets, then maybe one spouse takes the debt and takes those assets, and then they can file bankruptcy. But then bankruptcy has its own issues where if both spouses are on the agreement or it's a marital debt, there are laws where even if you sign it away in the divorce, it can come back and bite you. So it is. So for that reason, I'd probably say, you certainly want to be in a situation where you're at the end of the divorce, you have, the debt is only in your name and the debts that existed are somehow paid off. So, if you're coming out of divorce and there's a joint credit card and it's assigned to you, the other spouse should insist on a balance transfer that, you're going to pay these off and that's not going to exist, and you'll incur a new debt to pay that off so that is, it doesn't come back to haunt you.
And that's so important. I've actually got one right now that I'm dealing with where they owe money to the IRS, and the IRS doesn't really care who pays them. They want both of you on the hook.
Right.
And in the marriage agreement, the settlement agreement, they were originally going to put that each spouse has to pay 50% of it, blah, blah, blah. And I turned around and said, yeah, but what if the IRS says they don't care and they still want it from you? How are you protecting yourself? You really need to understand the consequences. And I think with debt, especially, as you said, if you can get rid of that joint debt, I think that's huge. We have a comment here. I'm going to read it from Cher. My ex-husband purchased an automobile dealership the day after our divorce became final. He kept it a secret from me until we had signed the papers. Was that something I could have looked into, but did not? By the way, we had one dealership that he paid me the value that his accountant valued, not mine. Did he do something wrong? I think that's got to be answered on a pretty general level because we don't know all the details with that.
That is, interesting. He bought a car dealership. I think I read that as a car dealer, and buying an entire business. There's definitely a way to look into that because this is not a candy bar that, it's like you're even a car, right? You go to the next day of your divorce, I'm going to go and buy myself my midlife crisis mobile. There's definitely paperwork involved and things that could have been said. So on his end, I'd be careful. I would have been careful. On your end, if you want to go do some digging, I suppose you can, because maybe, he made some statement in there that it doesn't jive with what he represented in the divorce case, right? So maybe, like I said before, if he represented that he had certain assets or certain ability to buy that dealership, to a bank, to a company, whatever it is, and his income is way higher in that application than it was in the divorce, something to look into. And you probably want to act fast because there's only so much time you have to fight something like that. So that is what it is. In terms of the question of the value of the dealership, that's his account versus your account. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts. You probably, your team, you want to have somebody looking at the value and saying, yeah, that makes sense and that doesn't make sense. How courts value businesses is an art. It's a whole topic in and of itself. You would probably need an expert evaluation expert, and then there's a cost benefit analysis of how much do you want to spend on that versus the risk you're taking that you're being shortchanged a little bit. So it sounds like you have a complicated situation. My kind of case, to be honest.
And I'll tell you, I think obviously those discussions were happening. It looks like it's been way too long, unfortunately. But hopefully that discussion will help other people, which is always nice as well. But those discussions on the dealership, they were not happening the morning after. They were happening before. And so obviously understanding all of what went in, and obviously where did the money come from would have been another consideration with that as well. So unfortunately,
it highlights, when you have a divorce with small businesses, it is, there's a lot going on, a lot of games people can play. Just a short, quick example. I once had a case where I represented the wife, and the husband had a bunch of different LLCs, and he was claiming, that he was losing money on one of his LLCs. And I said, yeah, well, you basically owned a house, you sold it to your LLC, you gave it to your parents, and now you're taking a loss for the rent they're not paying. And do you want me to crawl up your the tailpipe and look at what's going on with that situation? And okay, we settled.
I had a situation as well. He handed over the bank accounts for the business. He owned a business, $3,800, something like that. When I looked at the financials, there was a receivable from shareholder for $300,000.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you're the only shareholder.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Anyway, unfortunately, I got so many more questions. We're going to have you back on. But obviously, through our dialogue, it's readily evident that this is a complex situation, many different considerations to have. I always tell people and my clients that your divorce is the first chapter in the rest of your life. It's not the last chapter in this part of your life, because you're setting your life up to move forward. Sometimes you can't always see clearly through kind of the emotional whirlwind. So having the professionals to work with is very, very important. I'm going to ask, we only have about 2 minutes left, but if you can just talk a little bit about how you benefit your clients and work with them and how they can get a hold of you again, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
So I appreciate that so much. And divorce is kind of, it is crazy and you don't really know what's going on. The benefit I bring to my clientele, I tell people, my job is to help you make the right decision. And there's so many attorneys you hire and they're off to the races and they're just going to file something and they don't really tell you what's going on and they don't really keep you up to date and they don't tell you what's going on. I send my clients every single piece of paper that comes through on my case. I talk with them about, here's why you want to do A, B, and C. Here's why you don't want to do A, B, and C. Is this going to win? Do we want to spend $3,000 filing this if it's only worth $5,000 and you got a 50% chance of getting there? It's not. It's going to be a waste of time. And we sort of take a bigger picture view. We do run some numbers. Listen, you got to get a little bit, pay a little bit more on the debt, but you're going to get a lot more of the property. This is not the fight to have, or this is the fight to have. This is, you got a good shot here. And so that's kind of how I help my clients. I really try to, there's so many people that come to me and say, I wish I had you in the beginning. Or my lawyer never told me that or never explained that to me. I feel like I'm pretty good at explaining things. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm in the North Shore of Chicago. I'm in Northbrook, but I practice all over Chicago. 312-878-1202. Again, 312-878-1202. Reach my website. We're Hecht Schondorf LLC. It's HechtSchondorf.com. Again, HechtSchondorf.com. HechtSchondorf.com. Thank you so much for having me. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you.
Well, there's a positive comment there. Wish I would have known you back then, Mark. So
Wish I was back then.
Mark, and thank you. Shedding light and sharing your insights on complex situation, making it sound a lot more simple than it is, and sharing the ideas that you did. It's not an easy thing to do, so I appreciate that. I am Hirsch Serman. I'm your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. You can reach out for questions for me or for Mark Schondorf, our guest today. I look forward to you joining me on my next show. And the next show is called Building Badass Boundaries, which is not always an easy thing when you're going through a divorce. Thank you, and I look forward to you guys tuning in next time. Thank you again.